The pines whispered first. Low, slow murmurs in the morning fog, like the land itself remembered him even if men had tried to forget. He walked between the trees with a limp that never healed right, though it wasn't his leg that ached most. His rifle hung across his back like a memory. His boots crushed frost with each step, the earth cold and stubborn beneath him. He hadn't spoken aloud in 13 days. Maybe 14. He wasn't counting. What did it matter? The birds didn't mind his silence. The snow-milk river still carved its way down the hill whether he named it or not. The world moved without needing his voice, and in some stubborn, battered way, he found peace in that. Once, they called him a soldier. A good one. Maybe too good. But the war outlasted reason, and reason outlasted loyalty. And when he walked away from blood and smoke and a command he couldn't follow, they didn't call him anything at all. Just exiled. Just gone. His name was scrawled out from ledgers. His medals left rusting in a crate somewhere back east. And out here, at the edge of nowhere, no one asked who he'd been. Only if he'd shoot, or trade pelts, or stay out of town. He did all three. The cabin was his. Built by his hands, one log at a time. It leaned a little on the north side, and the roof creaked when the wind shifted. But it stood, and so did he. The fire inside had long since become habit, and so had the tea, bitter and dark, made from bark and patience. He drank it slowly as dawn spread fingers of light through the clouds. His only company, a whittled hawk perched on the mantel and the dog that never barked, only watched. He wrote letters sometimes. Not to anyone, not really. Just folded pages where he spoke to the things he couldn't say. He burned most of them, but once in a while, he tucked one under a rock by the river. As if the current might carry it somewhere softer. That morning, the stillness broke. He found the letter nailed to his fence post by a crooked nail, and a man with more whiskey than kindness in his veins. The note flapped in the wind like a broken wing. Just a single page. Someone had arrived in town. A mail-order bride, it said. Sent for, but left unclaimed. No name mentioned. No sender stepping forward. Just a woman, alone on the platform, waiting. He read it twice. Not because he cared. Or so he told himself. But because he knew what it meant to be left behind by promises that never kept. He folded the letter and tucked it into the pocket closest to his heart. 3 days passed. He didn't go. Then the wind shifted again, and something restless stirred in his chest. The town hadn't changed much. Still dust where roads should be, still eyes that followed him without speaking. He tied his horse near the trough and walked with that same steady limp toward the saloon. The smell of smoke, sweat, and disappointment curled from the doorway. Inside, men shuffled cards and spat tobacco, as if the century would never turn. She wasn't there. He found her instead on a bench outside the telegraph office, coat too thin for the wind, suitcase hugged against her chest like it held her bones together. She didn't cry. Just stared straight ahead at the nothing. Her hair was pinned in a way no one did out here. Neat. Like she still believed in order. Her hands were red from cold. She had a book in her lap but didn't read it. Just held it open like a shield. No one spoke to her. A few had tried, he could tell. The way the dust around her boots had too many boot prints for a girl no one wanted. She had been offered the wrong kind of attention. The kind that comes with grins too wide and hands too fast. He didn't say anything, not at first. Just stood across the street and watched. Not like a man, but like a ghost wondering if he was still allowed to cross back into the world. Then he stepped forward. She looked up when his shadow fell over her. Her eyes were not frightened. Only tired. He took off his hat. Cleared his throat. His voice cracked like old timber. "I'll take her," he said. "If she'll come." The world held its breath. She studied him like she'd learned not to trust quick offers. Then she stood. Her suitcase thudded softly against the wood as she rose. Her spine was straighter than he expected. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Not because he forgot it, but because no one had spoken it in so long, it felt like trying on an old coat you weren't sure still fit. He gave it to her in a whisper. She nodded once. No smile. Just an agreement made in silence. They left before anyone could change their minds. On the ride back, she said little. But once, when they crossed the creek, her hand brushed his. Not on purpose. But not by accident either. And something in him woke up. That night, as he sat by the fire, she asleep in the other room, he took out one of those letters he never sent. He didn't burn it this time. Just stared at the words like they belonged to someone else. Then he added a line. I think I brought a ghost home. But not the kind that haunts. The kind that remembers what it means to be seen. And outside, the wind didn't whisper anymore. It sang. She arrived with a name sewn into the hem of her dress and a letter folded so many times it was soft as cloth. The train had coughed her onto the platform at sundown, steam curling around her like smoke from a fire already gone out. She stepped off with careful grace, the kind not taught by schoolteachers but born of surviving where softness wasn't welcome. Her boots struck the planks with no echo. No one was waiting. Around her, men leaned from railings or from the shadows behind windows, eyes sharp with the kind of interest that had nothing to do with love. She didn't meet their gaze. Just held her small case to her chest, shoulders high, spine steady, as though she might balance her whole life on her back and still walk forward. No one said her name. Not once. She asked for the sheriff. He wasn't there. Asked for the preacher. Gone till Sunday. Asked if the man who sent the letter was coming. A shrug was her only answer. Later they told her the man had changed his mind. Or died. Or maybe never existed at all. No one really knew. Or wanted to. They offered her a cot in the back of the inn. A place to wait. Just for a day, they said. She stayed 3. By the second morning, she no longer looked toward the road. By the third, she began to disappear. She sat outside the general store with her case under one hand and a book in the other, though she hadn't turned a page in hours. Her dress was plain, neat. Buttons all accounted for. A ribbon still knotted at her wrist, faded pink, like a memory she couldn't unclench. The kind of girl raised to smile even when her throat closed. Children passed her without question. Dogs sniffed her hem. One woman, older and quiet, left a folded cloth of bread beside her without a word. She nodded in thanks. Ate it slowly. No one claimed her, but everyone saw. The storekeep muttered she was too proud. The saloon girls whispered she looked like someone who'd break before she bent. A few men made offers under breath. One said he'd take her for the night, just the night, and laughed when she didn't flinch. Another reached for her wrist. She stepped back without trembling, looked him in the eyes, and said nothing. But whatever he saw in her face made him stop. Still, each hour chipped at her like water on stone. Inside the letter she carried was her age, her birthplace, her intentions. She was not running. She had come here with purpose. To be chosen. To build something with her bare hands and someone else's broken ones. She believed in rebuilding. But belief, like courage, thins when it's left alone too long. She thought about leaving. Thought about selling the suitcase, the dress, the book. Thought about asking the postmaster if he could send her somewhere no one knew what rejection looked like. But where would that be? On the 4th day, the wind turned. She felt it before he arrived. He didn't speak when he came near. Just stood across the street like a shadow that had weight. His coat was the color of stormy earth, long and frayed at the cuffs. His boots moved with a drag, like every step had been earned in a different war. He watched her with something between apology and understanding, but no pity. She looked up. Their eyes met. There was silence, not hollow, but full. Then he stepped forward and said the words no one else had dared. I'll take her, if she'll come. The world did not move. A fly buzzed between them. A child laughed in the distance. But something shifted. Inside her. Maybe inside him too. She rose slowly. Lifted the case. The wind picked up a strand of hair and carried it across her cheek like a hand that once knew how to be gentle. What's your name? She asked. He answered it so softly the wind had to lean close to hear. They left before anyone could object. As the wagon rolled toward the edge of town, she glanced once over her shoulder. No one waved. No one called. But the woman who'd given her bread stood in the doorway, hands folded, eyes full. Not approval, not warning. Just witness. The trail was quiet. Pines swallowed the road in slow shadows. He didn't speak again, and she didn't mind. There was something honest about his silence. It wasn't cold. Just unpolished. Once, the wagon hit a stone and her hand brushed his. He pulled away too quickly, like he'd been stung. She looked down at her lap and didn't move. But a mile later he handed her a blanket without a word. And she understood. At the crest of a ridge, he slowed the horses and looked out over the land. She followed his gaze, endless trees, a thin river winding like a silver thread, smoke rising faint from the woods. "Is that your home?" she asked. He nodded. She waited for him to say more. He didn't. But she could see the shape of it in his shoulders, how the place had become part of him, how it held him even when he tried not to be held. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down but didn't touch her. Led her to the door but didn't open it. Just looked at her like he was asking a question without his lips. She stepped inside. It smelled of pine smoke and thyme. A small fire crackled in the hearth. A cup sat on the table, half full. She touched the chair's back gently. Everything was handmade. Everything worn. But nothing broken. He set her case beside the bed, nodded once, and walked back outside. She stood in the doorway, watching him chop kindling as though the sky weren't pinking with dusk, as though the world hadn't just turned on its side. Her ribbon fluttered in the breeze. She didn't know his story. But she knew what it was to wait. To be passed by. To be forgotten. And for the first time since arriving, she felt something new begin. It didn't have a name yet. But it didn't need one. Behind her, the fire snapped softly. In the yard, he looked up at her window as though sensing her there. She stepped back inside. And he let himself exhale. The first nights in the cabin passed like breath held beneath still water. No loud words, no clattering routines, only the soft friction of two lives learning the rhythm of each other's silence. She slept in the small room near the window. He took the corner near the hearth, where the old rocking chair creaked when the wind blew too hard. She folded her dresses with reverence, lined her few belongings on the single shelf like relics. A comb. A scarf. A stitched handkerchief with someone else's initials, now faded to memory. He noticed but said nothing. Some things are best kept in quiet corners. In the morning, she rose before the sun and stood on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. The pine trees stood like sentries, unmoving, as the world turned pale with daybreak. He watched from inside, stirring the kettle. She didn't know he saw her. Or maybe she did. But neither of them spoke of it. By the end of the first week, she had washed the windows. Not for him, but for herself. The world looked less like a prison when you could see it clean. She began sweeping the porch, mending what little needed it. He noticed that his tools were organized one morning, each hung carefully by size, as if someone believed even rusted things deserved order. He left her space. She gave him calm. One afternoon, he returned from chopping wood to find her in the small clearing behind the cabin. Her sleeves were rolled, hands in the earth, planting something green. Not flowers, no space for such luxuries, but herbs. Mint, sage, something that would serve them. Her fingers were covered in soil, but her eyes were bright with purpose. He stood watching longer than he meant to. When she saw him, she didn't flinch or stop. Just looked up and said softly, as if explaining a small truth, "The ground will hold more than bones if we let it." He helped her build a fence around the patch. No instructions exchanged, only shared tools, shared breath, shared effort. When it was done, she leaned her shoulder lightly against his. A second passed. Then she stepped away. But the warmth of it stayed in his sleeve long after. Their meals were simple: salted meat, root vegetables, hard bread softened in broth. She added dried rosemary to the stew once. He said nothing, but finished his bowl and went for seconds. Sometimes at night she'd hum. Not songs with words, but sounds that filled the air like low wind through canyon walls. He didn't ask where she learned them. He just listened. In return, he taught her how to read the tracks near the chicken coop. Raccoon here. Fox there. He showed her the right way to sharpen the hatchet, the trick to starting a fire even with damp wood. Not like a man instructing, but like a man remembering how to share what he knows. She found his letters one day. He came in from the river with fish slung over his shoulder and saw her on the porch, pages spread like wings across her lap. She looked up, guilt in her eyes, not for reading them, but for touching something he hadn't offered. He waited for anger to rise. It didn't. Just a quiet embarrassment, like someone hearing their own voice on a phonograph. She folded the letters gently, handed them back. I like the way you write sorrow, she said. You make it sound like it might soften someday. That night, he took the hawk carving from the mantel and placed it in her room. She didn't say thank you, but she moved it to face the door, like a guardian. Winter crept closer. The wind found its way through the chinks in the walls. They began sitting closer by the fire. Not touching, but within warmth. One night, she fell asleep in the chair beside him, head tilted just enough to rest against his arm. He didn't move. Not for hours. In the mornings, when he left for the woods, she packed his satchel with dried meat and a small apple, halved. She didn't need to tell him. He found the note tucked between the slices. Eat something sweet once in a while. And he did. The emotional thread between them thickened like twine drawn through time. No knots, no pull, just the quiet weaving of presence. No confessions. No declarations. But he began to wait at the edge of the trees until he saw her light the lantern at dusk. And she began to glance at the clock when he stayed too long near the river. One night, the silence broke in a different way. A thunderclap. Close. Loud enough to rattle the pots on the wall. He rose, rifle in hand, but it wasn't a threat. Just sky-splitting sound and rain that came down in silver sheets. She stood at the door, curtain drawn, staring at the storm. Her lips were parted. He stepped beside her, eyes scanning the dark, body tense from old habits. She turned to him. I'm not afraid of thunder, she whispered. But I used to flinch when doors slammed. It took me years to stop. His hand hovered at her back. Then rested there, light as breath. You don't flinch anymore, he said. No. But I still wait for someone to come through. The storm roared outside. But inside the cabin, time slowed. He looked down at her, not the way men stare, but the way someone watches a fire they thought long gone, now flickering back to life. She didn't move away. And in that breathless second, something in both of them, something bruised and buried, began to thaw. Outside, the rain softened. The thunder wandered off. But neither of them stepped back from that quiet space between heartbeats. In the morning, the sun rose pale behind clouds, and a single sprout in the garden pushed through the dirt. Neither of them noticed the man on horseback in the hills beyond the trees. Not yet. But his silhouette waited, still as regret. The sky split open like a worn seam pulled too tight. Rain came heavy, loud against the cabin roof, drumming in rhythms older than language. Inside, she sat on the floor with her legs tucked beneath her, sewing a loose button on his shirt by lantern light. He sat at the table, sharpening his blades slowly, the scrapes soft and even. Neither spoke. They rarely needed to. Lightning lit the walls for a heartbeat, her profile caught in gold-blue shadow, a quiet kind of beauty that didn't ask to be noticed. He looked up at her for a moment too long, eyes holding a truth he still didn't know how to give shape to. She felt it. But didn't look. The wind shifted. He paused mid-stroke. The dog lifted its head. Growled low. She stilled. Thread halfway pulled. Then knocking. Hard. Ungentle. The kind of knock that never asked permission, only demanded presence. He stood slowly, tucking the knife into his belt. His face unreadable. A breath passed between them. She rose to her feet and set the shirt aside. Her hands brushed her apron, suddenly unsure of where to rest. The second knock wasn't needed. The door creaked open before he could reach it. Framed in the doorway, dripping rain and audacity, stood a man with a cocked smile and whiskey breath. Tall, lean, soaked through but unbothered. His hat was gone, hair slicked back like grease on rusted gears. "Well now," the man drawled, "ain't this a picture?" She stepped back before she even saw his face. A flinch, quick and deep. He noticed. "Don't worry, sugar. I ain't here for a fight. Just a little visit for old time's sake." He looked past her, scanning the room like a thief studying a vault. The soldier didn't move. Not yet. Only spoke, low and even. "You're not welcome here." The stranger laughed. A sound too loud for the small space. "You must be the prize she ended up with." "Hell, didn't think anyone would take her. Thought she'd be gone back east by now." She didn't answer. But her hands trembled at her sides. "You know, she was supposed to marry a preacher's boy, once. All quiet and proper. But turns out she had a little more fire than the good Lord allowed. Ain't that right?" The soldier took a step forward. "I said leave." The stranger's eyes danced with something feral. "Or what? You gonna fight for her?" "She ain't yours, not really. She's just hiding out. Same as you. Whole cabin's a grave full of things that ain't finished yet." She turned her face away, but not before the soldier saw the hurt flicker there, an old wound being ripped open by a voice she thought she'd escaped. He didn't yell. Didn't raise the rifle leaning by the door. Instead, he said quietly, but with steel, "You've got 5 seconds. The stranger's grin faded, like fog burned off by heat. 4. A flicker of hesitation. 3. The dog stood now, silent but ready. 2. The stranger stepped back, hands up. "Didn't mean no trouble. Just sayin' hello?" He turned and vanished into the storm, swallowed by wind and rain, boots thudding off the porch like nails into wood. The door closed with a whisper. She sank into the chair by the fire, arms crossed tight around her chest. Not crying. Just small. Smaller than he'd ever seen her. He crouched beside her. Didn't touch her, not yet. Just waited. After a long silence, she spoke. "That man was my husband's brother. The one who sent for me. The one who never came. They said he died, but I think now that was a lie. Or maybe it was just easier to believe than the truth." She looked at him. Eyes wet, not from tears, but from memory. "I left because he made staying unbearable. I told no one why. I thought if I came far enough, it wouldn't follow me." He nodded once, slow. "You did come far." She let out a shaky breath. Not quite a laugh. "You still want me here? Even after?" "Yes." The word was simple. Firm. Not a decision made just now, but one rooted deep, already planted days ago. She exhaled, and with it, let go of something heavy. That night, the storm softened. The fire burned low. He brought her the shirt she'd left behind. Sat beside her as she sewed the last button. When she finished, she didn't hand it to him. She folded it neatly and placed it on the table. Then, with trembling fingers, she touched his wrist. "Just a moment. Just enough." "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. Then, after a pause, placed his hand over hers. Not possession. Not pity. Just warmth shared. They sat that way until the lantern sputtered. Neither spoke of the stranger again. But before dawn, while she still slept, he stepped out into the wet morning and followed the trail of footprints through the pines. The stranger's campfire had burned to ash. But something else was left behind, his mark carved into a tree. A name. Hers. Scratched with cruel care. The soldier stood staring at it for a long while, the mist gathering around him like ghosts come to listen. Then he drew his knife, and slowly, carefully, carved a line through the name. When he returned to the cabin, he carried no firewood. Only silence. But later that day, When she stepped outside, she found the garden gate repaired, a small birdhouse hung beside it. And nailed to the door, above the latch, a thin piece of driftwood. She traced the letters burned into it. One word. Safe. The first time she touched the sign, it was with the same care one might offer a wounded bird. Just fingertips, resting against the word carved in driftwood like a quiet oath. Safe. The promise hummed beneath her skin, soft but solid. She didn't ask who made it. She didn't have to. The letters bore his stillness, his steadiness, the same way the floor remembered his boots and the wind held the shape of his silence. Inside, the cabin breathed easier. The shadows no longer pressed quite so tight around the edges. The fire warmed more than hands, it warmed habit, warmed trust. She caught herself humming again as she cleaned the windows. He caught himself smiling when she laughed at the dog chasing leaves. Neither said anything about the shift. Some things only deepen when left unnamed. He had started carving again. Little things, a bird with outstretched wings, a fox curled in sleep. She found them tucked on windowsills or beneath her cup in the morning. Not as gifts, but as anchors. As if he were marking the days not with words, but with shape and grain. She never asked why. Just placed them on the shelf beside her book and let them keep her company. She began writing again, too. Letters folded small, slipped into the pocket of her apron. Names not addressed, dates not recorded. But the ink dried cleaner now. Less smudged with fear. One afternoon, she asked him what his favorite color was. He looked at her like she'd asked the name of the stars. Then shrugged. Blue, I reckon. Sky just before snow. She smiled, as if she'd suspected it. You. She hesitated. Amber, she said. The color of honey and sunlight. The color of voices I used to believe in. He didn't speak, but he remembered. Days later, she found a stone on her pillow, the exact shade she'd described. Smoothed by river water. Warm to the touch. They didn't share a room. Not yet. But his coat now hung on the peg beside hers. Their boots sat side by side. And every night, he lit the lantern in the hallway first, so she wouldn't walk in darkness. Then came the second letter. Folded in a black envelope, slick with rain. Delivered not by hand, but by a child from town, too young to read what he carried. She opened it at the table. He watched from the other side, arms crossed, eyes sharp with attention she hadn't seen in weeks. The handwriting was familiar. Coiled and cruel. The words worse. Asterisk, you belong to me. I'll be back for what's mine. Asterisk. No signature. None needed. She didn't cry. Just folded the paper, slid it into the fire, and watched it burn without blinking. He didn't speak. But she could feel the change in the room, the weight of something old pressing against the doorframe, creeping through the cracks like a winter draft. He stood for a long while after she left the room, staring into the flames. Then he walked outside, toward the shed. The next day, he rebuilt the fence. Reinforced the windows. Nailed a second lock to the front door. She said nothing. Just brewed tea, stronger than usual, and poured 2 cups. That night, she found him awake at the table, sharpening his knife again. The dog at his feet, the fire low. She didn't interrupt. Just sat across from him, hands folded, heart loud in her chest. Do you believe me? She asked. He looked up slowly. I don't need to believe what I already know. Her breath caught. Not because the words were soft, but because they came from a man who had once forgotten how to speak at all. Then the knock came. Not loud. Not rushed. Just certain. He rose. Took his rifle from above the door. Looked at her once, an unspoken question. She nodded. When he opened the door, the man stood there again. Clean-shaven now. Hat in hand. Smile stretched too wide. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. Behind him, 2 more men waited on horseback. Faces hidden beneath brims and rain. She stood just behind the soldier's shoulder. Straight-backed. Quiet. She's not going anywhere with you, the soldier said. The man chuckled. You think she chose you? You think a broken girl like that has a say? That was when she stepped forward. She walked past the soldier, past the threshold, and looked the man in the eyes. You don't get to use my silence anymore, she said. And you don't get to own my name. Then she turned and placed her hand on the wooden sign above the door. This is my name now. The man scoffed, readying his words like a pistol, but the sound of the rifle cocking stopped him cold. The soldier hadn't raised it yet. But he could. And would. I'm only going to say this once, the soldier said. You ride out now, and I forget I ever saw your face. You don't, and you won't leave standing. The man sneered. Looked past the soldier at her, as if she might flinch. She didn't. Finally he spat into the dirt. Mounted his horse. You ain't worth the trouble, he muttered. But next time I see you, don't expect kindness. He turned, rode off without looking back. The others followed. When the dust settled, she exhaled. He shut the door gently. Locked it. She leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor. He sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. They said nothing for a long time. Then she looked at him. You believed in me before I remembered how to believe in myself. He shook his head. No. You did the hard part. I just stood still long enough for you to see it. They sat that way until the fire dimmed. Later that night, she brought her pillow to the room with the rocking chair. Laid it on the floor beside his. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth. He stepped outside to split wood and found a letter pinned to the fence. Only this time, it was written in her hand. One word. Home.